Have you ever felt so focused and so immersed in an activity that you lose track of time? Things become effortless, like you're achieving perfection. Perhaps, my friend, you were in the flow. If so, then you're like my next guest, who has been studying what it means to be in a flow state. His name is Troy Erstling, and he's been living the digital nomad lifestyle. And he lives around the world while writing some of the most phenomenal, thought-inducing articles I've ever had the pleasure of coming across. Troy is very passionate about the potential for all of us to find and achieve flow states on a regular basis to live to our true potential. In this episode, we dive deep into the inner workings of flow, and we tackle heavy concepts like transient hyperfrontality and cover the neurochemistry of flow states. Troy shares his interests and routines in meditating, freestyle rapping, slacklining, and even how he unintentionally found himself doing a TEDx talk. We also cover some of the interesting topics of dealing with negative emotions, mental health, and the importance of creating the right systems. This is a deep dive into flow, what it is, and how to obtain it. So please welcome Troy Erstling. Hi, Troy. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Cody. How you doing? Thanks for having me on.
And so I want to get out and start just by asking you a really simple, small question. What is your why?
Ooh, my why. Joy. Happiness. I guess my why, everything that I do is to live a happier, more enjoyable life, remove friction, remove resistance, and live my life and doing the things that I love doing and have fun while doing it. Surrounded by people that I love too.
I suppose in some ways that's what we're all trying to achieve. Would you summarize that as just being happy?
Yeah, absolutely. But happiness is very vague, right? It's like it means something different to all of us. So that in and of itself, we can go down a deep rabbit hole.
And so when you say joy and family and whatnot, is that what you live for, or do you have a greater purpose or any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I genuinely believe that if I'm living my best life, if I'm enjoying myself, if I'm doing the things that bring me, fulfillment and gratitude, then that usually ripples out into everything else in my life. So I guess from there, I can live as an example, help the people in my immediate surroundings, teach other people, kind of what's working for me or not for that matter as well. So yeah, my why is just to use that as a means of connecting with other people. I find that the more that I'm kind of living my best, happiest existence, the better my relationships are. Everything in my life kind of moves. So I guess that really drives me to help other people do the same, because you also see a lot of people suffering. And one of the things that I talk about a lot, self-created suffering, how people are their own worst enemy type of stuff. And that hurts me. I'm like, oh my God, life is so enjoyable. How do I help you guys? See, it all circles back to that, I guess.
Yeah, one thing I learned a long time ago is that we need to love ourselves before we can love others, right?
Amen. I'm a big believer in self-love. I always say that the most important relationship that you have in life is the one that you have with yourself.
And so going back on what you tend to write about a lot is flow state. So wondering if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess high level, right? Flow state is kind of known as like that in the zone effect, in the pocket, tapped in, whatever you want to call it. It's kind of like a state where, more or scientifically at least, it's explained as a state where you feel and perform at your best. So you're not only producing your best work, but you feel your best while you're doing it. And it's really been fascinating to me because it explains a lot of experiences that I've had in my life, whether with creative output or whether with, traditional work, physical activities, meditational experiences, psychedelic experiences. Flow kind of seems to be that common pattern that unites them all and really brings understanding to it. So I've been really personally fascinated in this for the last few years now. just kind of diving into everything and then designing my life around that as well.
Mm. So then what is flow specifically? Is flow anytime we go into a basketball game, or we're in a sports, or we're running? Is it when we're writing something, or we're at our jobs? What is flow? How do we know when we're in flow?
Yeah, so technically speaking, it's a non-ordinary state of consciousness or an altered state of consciousness where, like I said, you feel and perform at your best. There are certain biomarkers that we know in terms of what's going on in the brain, like things like low alpha waves, high theta waves, kind of sustaining that state, different neurochemistry that's present. Having said that, we don't really know whether or not you're in flow on a day-to-day basis, right? I'd need to be hooking you up to brain and heart monitors, testing your neurochemistry. But for all of us, we've had that experience where, time kind of slips in a funny way. So Stephen Kotler described this as what's called stir, right? So you have these experiences of selflessness, meaning, you're kind of no longer in your head, you're out of your head. Thoughts kind of slow down. Timelessness, meaning time either speeds up or slows down. You kind of lose your sense of time and how it's passing. Effortlessness, in terms of things are just kind of flowy. It's really easy. There's zero latency between thought and action. And then R for richness, in terms of kind of reaching new states of your potential and kind of coming up with unique novel insights, doing things that you never previously did before, right? So that's kind of the technical components. But like I said, on an individual basis, it is very individual. We all have our different gateways to flow states. Some of us are adrenaline junkies who get it from chasing down mountains or whatever it might be. Then you got the introspective deep thinkers who are sitting there, immersed in creative work, just typing away, and that's their flow state. So highly individualized, but a lot of us have had those experiences where things are timeless and effortless and everything just kind of flows. And that's kind of why they call it that.
Now, I've had a love-hate relationship with flow, not in the sense that I don't like it, but it's been hard to consistently find, where I will be, maybe I'm making a graphic design or I'm coming up with an idea for a business, and then maybe the next day I'm running or something that's completely separate. But I have often problems trying to retain or have that flow again. And commonly, one time I went writing, and then I was writing until 4 a.m. in the morning, and I didn't need anything to stay awake. I was just so intrinsically into it. But then the next day when I went back to it, I couldn't find that flow state. I couldn't find that motivation, that seemingly untrained conscious level of thoughts or ideas. They just kept coming. They weren't there anymore. Do you know how we can try and find our flow states and then try and retain them?
Yeah. So for replication and consistency, the main thing to keep in mind is what's called the flow cycle, right? So this basically starts off with struggle and ends in recovery, right? So you have struggle, release, flow, and then recovery. And the main reason why it's so difficult to replicate and have consistently is because most of us don't know how to properly go through the recovery phase, right? So flow takes a huge toll on your body and mind, right? Like I mentioned before, neurochemically, you have a lot of different neurochemicals that are popping up between dopamine, anandamide, norepinephrine, serotonin, endorphins, all being released at the exact same time. Physically, you're usually exerting yourself, or mentally, you're even exerting yourself a lot, right? So after that comes proper recovery. So part of it is people stay in the state for too long. It feels so good that they don't want to get out because it's not consistent. You're like, I don't get this very frequently. I got to stay in here as long as I can, right? But those are the same habits that are preventing you from getting back into it quickly, right? So knowing not only how to get in, but then how to get out, when to get out, how to properly recover, because then recovery is then followed again by struggle. If you're not properly recovered and then you're going back into the struggle phase, right? That's where we see injury, burnout, right? So take, for example, you're working, get a lot of creative output, stay in that zone too long, don't properly recover because you get a short night of sleep, for example, right? Next day, because you're not properly recovered, you haven't given yourself that time. Now you're going back into the struggle phase, and day usually has a spiral effect after that. So a lot of that consistency really comes from navigating that flow cycle, understanding and developing systems for how to get in, how to get out, how to recover, and how to be aware of kind of what stage that you're at in that cycle to be able to get yourself there.
Is there any place that people can go to learn more about this particular cycle that you're talking about?
Yeah. So in general, I always recommend Stephen Kotler's books. He's the guy who I learned all this stuff from, more or less recycling a lot of this from him in that regard. But Rise of Superman dives deeply into that if you're interested in the book. And then he's also currently launched a course called Zero to Dangerous. And in that course, you actually go through identifying your personal flow cycle and how to implement that into your life, how to sequence certain activities, all that sort of fun stuff.
Now, didn't he write the book Stealing Fire as well?
Yes, exactly. Stealing Fire doesn't go as deeply into the specifics of the flow cycle. That's why I mentioned Rise of Superman. But yes, that's another great book that you could look into as well. A lot of great science in there.
Now, I've been listening to his Rise of Superman, and for maybe the first 50%, he's talking a lot about surfers and how they discovered flow, and how one of the riders, I believe on the Millennium Wave, how he instinctively put his hand out to try and guide himself in this monster wave, and he was able to make it. Is flow state, did it originate from surfing, or where did flow originate from? Do you know?
So it's a long, complicated, convoluted history, but more or less it originally kind of started with behavioral psychology, understanding, how the mind works, how motivation works, how top performers are kind of performing and what are the patterns between them. That led us to, positive psychology. So you had a lot of different people like Maslow, William James, who've kind of led that foundation. Csikszentmihalyi was the first guy who called it flow and really observed people. And for him, he called it that because he was observing people across a variety of different disciplines. He's looking at people across all walks of life, from barbers to mechanics to artists to whatever it might be, right? So he was the first guy who kind of created that word for it. And then Stephen has kind of taken his research and, built upon that and continued to take it in new directions. That's kind of like the origins of flow, so to speak. And then he was just kind of documenting and now trying to really put it into scientific scrutiny of, okay, what's going on in these people's heads? And then how can we reverse engineer that?
Do you believe that everybody needs to find their flow state and then maximize the amount of time that they're in their flow state in order to live to their fullest, truest potential?
Yeah. So I'm always hesitant, go overboard on the over optimization. You don't want to do this at the cost of your personal sanity and mental health and well-being. Like I said, joy is kind of central to all of this. Having said that, if you're doing it right, flow should be bringing you a lot of joy, and it should be making your life a lot more rich. And it's an enjoyable thing to lose track of time because you're so immersed in the work that you're doing, whether it's physical, creative, or just the actual work that we do to make money. Or if all those are even blended, all the better for you. So for me, it's just really if this is an optimal state of existence, you can't live in flow. Like I said, it's a cycle of, the struggle, release, flow, and recovery. So you can't live in flow per se, but you can definitely design your life around it. And when you have those magical moments, it's really beautiful and it's just fun. It's a great way to live. And am I in full blown flow every day? Like I said, I have no way to tell, but if you're living your life doing enjoyable tasks and you're more productive as a result of it, then there's really not much downside.
Do you believe there's any amount of flow that we should try and have on a regular basis, like maybe an hour of flow a week, and you sort of can check off that box, and that will give you? I know it's really hard to put this in numbers, but that you will find that you'll 20% happier or something along that lines.
Yeah, so it really depends on what your goals and objectives are and where you're seeing the most resistance in your life. Like for me, I'll give an example. I get my best flow states on the slack line, but I'm not able to really immerse myself in the slack line to the level that I need to on a daily basis, right? So if I can get one juicy session like that per week, I am absolutely thrilled. But then in, I guess, my day-to-day life, I look at, I kind of want daily flow states in terms of just, was I focused on one activity for an extended period of time where I blocked out distractions, and did I handle my own internal resistance well? Whether or not it was actually flow, I'm like, okay, I want that structured on a daily basis. I want those systems for myself So that even if I'm not necessarily in flow, I've given myself that space and comfort to be able to be like, all right, it's okay. How do we navigate this?
So, with all the things that you have whenever you're trying to enter flow states, what are the typical things that you find flow with? Is it just doing the slack line, which is, if I recall, that's balancing on a line, sometimes over water or not?
Yeah, exactly. I got a lot of gateways. I wrote about this last week, but I've had a lot of activities in my life that have kind of pulled me in this direction, whether it be juggling. I used to do competitive hacky sack. It's called footbag, freestyle rapping and poetry, drawing pictures, the slackline, and then writing. Those are right now, I would say my predominant ones are definitely the slackline and writing. I have smaller ones also, just like my daily practices, like meditation, the occasional experience where you just kind of fall into the zone quickly. Just in general, gratitude is always a good one, just gratitude meditation specific, right? So I would say the slackline and writing are like my two main ones. But even right now, right? Like I'm a sales guy. I talk to people all day on the phone and interview people. I love talking to people. So I definitely get like my group flow moments, or even when I'm ranting, I like to think it's still group flow.
Yeah, I've found that I can sometimes encounter flow when I'm having a conversation, and that's partly why I wanted to launch this podcast, because I'd have so
Yeah.
many great conversations that I wish were recorded because I knew they would help somebody if they were interested in that topic. So when it comes to various flow states, what are some of the other flow states that you've seen in other people? I know that one of your blog posts, you mentioned that your brother was an artist and that inspired you a little bit in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that I had a good childhood of watching people in flow. My brother was a really good artist. He doesn't do it anymore. I've been nagging him now to do it because it was one of those childhood pursuits that he lost sight of, so to speak. In general, I think that's also a thread to pull on for discovering your own flow states, right? What did you enjoy as a kid? But in terms of, I guess, witnessing flow, I don't know. I didn't really have too many models or examples. I think it's just we're all drawn to looking at people who are great at what they do. So I think initially it was kind of like that young experience with my brother, my best friend, who was a great athlete. But then from there, it was more of like an internal journey of kind of discovering these different activities, more so than trying to replicate what I saw externally, if that makes sense.
How connected do you think flow is to happiness? And whether or not, like, personally, I would love to have flow all the time with work. And of course, we know that's not possible. But I know that I can also go and run or bike ride. And then I know I can be in flow with those various exercises. But then it doesn't necessarily make me happy in the sense that I'm not producing. Because for me, that's really what I value, is being able to produce something of tangible benefit to others. And it can frustrate me sometimes. But if I'm still able to induce flow within, say, exercise, do you think that's good enough? Do you think that will make me content and happy? And I should stop trying to achieve this flow state with work?
Well, it's tricky, right? Because it really depends on what your goals and motivations are. What brings you the greatest sense of joy and fulfillment. If you get a lot of joy and fulfillment out of creating great, meaningful content for people and helping people and, having output, and that gives you joy and you enjoy that product, then hell yeah, keep doing that. The exercise will help along the way, but it's just one of kind of the tools that hopefully will get you to produce better content and better work and better output. So it's really all just about being clear in what your specific goals are. And yeah, in one sense, you might be driving yourself nuts trying to say like, I need to constantly keep getting things done, and there's always, the awareness of trying to tone that back. But at the same time, if we get joy out of being productive and doing great things, then follow that also.
So I want to switch gears a little bit, and maybe we can come back to flow. But I've noticed that you've talked a little bit about ADHD and that you've had dealing with your own mental health struggles, as sort of we all do growing up. And just wondering if you have anything on that, about how you were able to get over ADHD, if you feel like you still have it.
Yeah, so it's actually the perfect segue because I think the ADHD stuff was also a gateway into the flow stuff. So to kind of move in reverse now. So I discovered a lot of these topics from flow also, not only from Stephen Kotler, but when I started listening to the Tim Ferriss podcast. And, he had people on there like Josh Waitzkin and Cal Newport and Derek Sivers. And I remember a lot of them talked about Josh Waitzkin in specific, in the art of learning. He talked a lot about his experience with that in the zone effect. And he talked about, internal and external triggers and how to, create these pockets of deep work, right? And then Cal Newport with deep work. And then that combining at the same time with my meditation practice. So I think that those two kind of came together at a unique moment. And I say that because, right, the deep work of only focusing on one thing at a time, really difficult for somebody with ADHD because your mind wants to jump all over the place. So I saw the importance of blocking out distractions and creating that time, because an ADHD prone mind will jump at whatever low hanging fruit is there or whatever bait's there. And it's like squirrel, and then I'm off on a tangent, right?
Yep.
So block all that stuff out. Okay, that makes sense. But even once you block stuff out, your mind is still your worst enemy, right? And that's where meditation came into place. So in the meditation practice, learning how to watch your breath, right? Watching, paying attention, mind wanders, notice that your mind wandered. Oh crap, I'm wandering. Now pull it back, right? And that exercise of noticing that you're lost in thought and then pulling yourself back to the present moment is exactly what you need to train to be better at ADHD, so to speak, to say that, you can improve it. Right? Because it's the ability to kind of remain immune to those distractions, or at least notice when you become distracted and pull yourself back. So we've all, been through the email. You go to check one email. Next thing you know, you're looking at all of them. You forgot about the task that you need to do. And, 30 minutes have passed. So by practicing meditation with these deep work, kind of flow related principles, that was the biggest thing that helped me with my ADHD. So just those systems in and of itself, being aware of distractions, creating up systems to avoid distractions, creating an environment that, really helps me to focus on deep work, that in and of itself is huge, right? And then from there, to kind of take a step back in terms of ADHD on the whole, I think for me, my favorite letter in there is hyperactive. I got a lot of energy. So it was also kind of this journey of, how do I best harness all this energy? How do I best use it? And I think for a long time, right, a lot of what we're taught in school is to suppress that, to hold it in, to try and control it. And that just doesn't really work for me. So it's been more so, how do I best channel that energy into different activities? And I think it's also building on that, right, with the hyperactivity. So I think people with ADHD in general, it's not that they have a bad attention span. It's that because they're easily distractible, it's difficult to maintain their attention. You need something so stimulating, so engaging, that it doesn't allow them to look away. So I think that when I look at how I design my life and flow states and work and stuff that I do, I need that immersion, because it's that thing that pulls me in so deeply that I don't, have the need to look away or be distracted. And then the hyperactivity kicks in, and it's like suddenly I got unlimited energy for this activity that I'm doing. So I kind of look at it as a superpower in that regard, in terms of if you're able to grab my attention and hold it well, now I'm diving in with full force type of thing.
Right. That's brilliant. Thank you for that. I have a lot of notes. I wanted to add on the ADHD thing. There's also another people, some might call it a superpower, is that they have a tendency to hyperfocus on something longer than, say, a regular neurotypical person with a regular brain, and that can be a benefit.
Yes.
And I've also taken stimulants because I myself am ADHD, and I've noticed whenever I take in the stimulants that it reduces the frequency at which I can have flow states or hyper focus on things that are intrinsically interesting, because it just sort of adds that base level of dopamine throughout the day instead of allowing you to have a spike whenever you're hyper focused on that one activity. But do you have any experience or thoughts on, say, whether or not people or kids should take ADHD medication in the first place?
Oh man, no.
Probably not, right? Yeah.
No, overall, I think, and this is a whole different tangent, but America's got a very big pill and medication problem.
Yeah.
We're putting children on medication way too young. And the person who could say this better than me, the most famous TED Talk of all time, How Our Schools Kill Creativity, is all about, a story of a girl who was incredibly creative and went on to, build opera performances. And I forgot exactly what her name was, but go watch this TED Talk. But she's a kid who would have been put on medication in today's world. And I think that it's difficult because they're people with a lot of energy and difficult to handle. But No, don't put your kid on medication. Let them learn how to work with themselves and master their own internal world and use it as a superpower rather than trying to suppress it.
And I know in Europe, they have a different ideology around hyperactive kids or those with ADHD. Is I think it's either in Sweden or Denmark that they will just let the kid run around the school. Whereas in America, of course, we're taking away their lunchtime, which only adds to the problem. And we're shortening whenever schools are trying to maximize the schedule, they're shortening the actual playtime, which only adds to the problem. And then the kid can't sit still and it's like, let's medicate them.
Yeah, it's horrible. And just from my own personal experiences to add on this, right? Like Adderall made me a zombie. My whole personality is my energy, my enthusiasm, my joy. When I was put on that stuff as a sophomore in high school, it was like I was a zombie. I didn't have any of my energy and what makes me me. And that drove me insane. I didn't stay on it for very long. I was probably on it for like 6 months. And to be honest, every time that I had taken it after that, I took it once in college. In university, it was the only time that I got a D on a test because it was information in one ear, out the other. I got straight A's otherwise. As a kid who was diagnosed with ADHD, graduated magna cum laude. And I don't generally consider myself a great student either. But yeah, man, it's disrupting your brain chemistry and it affects your essence of who you are.
Right. Now, I want to jump back to systems about how you have created systems to avoid distraction and even how meditation has helped you to avoid that distraction. I know you touched on awareness, but say meditating 20 minutes a day, how does that make you less distractible, more focused, more productive, et cetera?
Yeah. So going back to what I said before of that core foundational practice in meditation, which is I think the most important to develop, is the attention to breath. Right? Focusing on my breath, mind wanders, noticing that it's wandered, and then bring it back. Because by learning just about what got your attention, what types of thoughts got your attention, what type of sounds got your attention, feelings in the body got your attention, you learn a lot about how you react to situations in life, right? So if you're constantly reacting to every itch on your face, every pain in your back, every thought about work that you have, then you're still reacting and you're in this place of reactivity. And a lot of it is that ability to notice that thought pop up, but not take the bait, so to speak. Right. And then you start to notice how this happens in your day-to-day life, right? Somebody says a small comment to you and you notice that little quick sensation where you're like, I was about to say something, but no, I'm gonna pull back right now. Mm-hmm. You notice that your phone your phone goes off, you go to pick it up and you're like, you know what? Stay there. So even though, you're not completely removing the habit, just that awareness of like, oh crap, I'm mindlessly looking at my phone right now. It really helps you just develop that sensitivity, awareness, and then start really developing that as a muscle.
Right. Because we have our subconscious system that's always making choices for us and interacting with the world when we're not actually consciously thinking about it. And then this awareness allows us to question those things that we're doing on a regular basis. And the example I always bring is I would always get up from my computer and grab a snack multiple times a day. And then at one point when I started meditating, I realized that a lot of it was when I encountered a task or an email that I just did not want to do. And I would just instinctively get up. And I never asked myself, wait, why am I getting up? I think I just had the story in my head of telling myself, well, I'm hungry. I'm just going to grab a snack. And it turned out that wasn't the real reason.
Yeah. Mine is a tricky guy.
Do you have any stories on your end about how meditation has helped you?
Yeah, just general reactivity. I find that because I'm so energetic and easily enthused, I used to be a lot more reactive, especially in face-to-face conversations. Not necessarily like, the way that I respond to people and feel people's energy, the way that I react to certain comments. Like I've had a lot of situations where, somebody will say something to me and you feel those sensations of like anger well up inside you. And just that feeling in and of itself is enough for me to be like, holy crap, what was that? Right. And that almost distracts me from the anger itself. I'm like, whoa, Jesus Christ, this was powerful. Right. And that in and of itself helps me to kind of stop and slow down. There's so many now that none really pop into my mind in specific, but that awareness of feelings and just in general, seeing myself not like, I don't have notifications on my phone anymore. I don't operate with a lot of tabs open. I don't fall into these easy traps that I used to. So I think that's kind of where I look at like okay, we're making progress. I don't remember any other ones though.
Now, you mentioned emotions, and you have a lot of great blog posts, and one of them where you imagine your emotions like the characters in a Pixar movie. Can you explain more about that and that concept and how you came up with it?
Yeah, the personification of emotions. So I think that was inspired by that movie Inside Out with the different personalities in the head. If you haven't seen the movie, it's the story of like this girl who's living her life and she's got these 5 emotions that are in her head. And depending on which one is in the driver's seat, she has these different experiences. And these experiences lead to what she calls core memories. Right? So these are like her core foundational childhood memories. Are they positive or are they negative? How that affects her inner world. So I love animated movies in general. And I think that like in general, right, as I was talking about, when you're sitting and meditating, you notice all these different voices and scripts in your head kind of start to run wild. And you can over time start to kind of notice patterns and trends and personify them, right? So like I got like certain anxious, worried ones, where I grew up, I'm a Jewish guy and there's these like anxious cartoons, of the Jewish guy, like, oh my God, my asthma, I'm freaking out right now, man. Oh my God. Right? Like, I noticed myself do this type of stuff. And it's like I could change the voice in my head of like, well, what happens if this happens? What happens if that happens? And then I switch it to that kind of anxious Jewish guy. Suddenly I'm like, stop being so hard on yourself. Take it a little bit more easy. So it's little stuff like that that just makes it fun. It makes it lighthearted. And then you're like, you get to laugh at yourself a little bit.
And so in some sense, you become a subjective observer of your own mind. And then
yes, well said.
Even potentially having a conversation with yourself.
Exactly.
And in recent research, they've shown that if you refer to yourself in third person, and I said this on another podcast where somebody got in front of me and then I was angry. And then I just said, Cody is angry. And then being able to view your emotions as you're still having them, and then to try and logically determine what is the next path of action with the least amount of future regret. Whereas a lot of people, and particularly in men, where we just, and in fact, I recall another study where they looked at the prosecution of women versus men, and men tend to get lower sentences for similar crimes because it's sort of accepted in society that men can't control their emotions, which is completely untrue, but that's the sort of the societal norm that we have today.
Amazing. Love those studies. I love that a lot. It's funny also that you say that because I've recently started referring to myself as we rather than just me. It's like me and the guy in my head. We're making decisions as a team now, and we got to operate in harmony with each other.
And whenever I've been doing meditation, it's allowed me to try and do activities like whenever I go out and do photography, and I would always be in this photography mode. But every time I go out and try and capture a sunset or whatnot, I always try and have one conscious breath, or I'll look around me and just look at the sunset, look at the birds, and not just peer it through the eyes of the lens and appreciate that moment. And the times that I've done that is I remember that. I think we forget all those experiences, or we'll have a peak experience and we'll remember the peak experience, but we don't always remember the individual experiences. And on a lesser note, maybe we always think that we're always going to have fun whenever we go on travel, but often it's saying goodbye to your kids or having a cup of coffee in the morning that you don't realize how much you appreciated that until it's gone. And with an awareness or meditation practice, I know there's various types of meditation. Actually, I'd love for you to go into that, but even something as simple as eating a grape. And there's a whole meditation exercise on how to eat a grape and to be conscious with the flavor, with the texture, and looking at all the aspects of it, because there's so much of that happens in our daily life that we are just completely oblivious to.
Yeah, happy that you said that. There's something called anchoring, which is kind of like you're saying, these moments of mindfulness, but by stopping and kind of seizing hold of that present moment, taking a deep breath, really slowing it down, you literally anchor it in your mind. And like you said, you remember them so much more vividly because you took those moments to just stop, pause, and be mindful for that second. And there's like so many anchors that you can use. Like you mentioned the breath, you could use noises, you could use tastes, feelings in the body and emotions, right? Gratitude for that moment. Anytime that you're like, holy crap, where am I? What's going on? Even if it's a mundane moment, at a coffee shop, that breath and that moment of anchoring is so powerful. And then when you are ever in a bad mood, you could pull on those anchors and you could remember how you felt in that moment. And then it makes you feel better right now.
Right. Yeah, I refer to that as having a safe space. And I think it's important for everybody to have that. And for me, it's actually just sitting on my couch, like petting my cat. And
Yeah.
for me, that gives me happiness. And it doesn't matter whether you're taking psychedelics or whether you're just having a panic attack, to be able to revert to a mental safe space. I think everybody needs to have something like that.
Amen. So healthy.
Can you touch a little bit about your meditation practice, how you came to it, maybe the various types of meditation practices as well?
Yeah, sure. My meditation practice began when I was living in India. I'm an asthmatic and I was having breathing issues. And I used to work out of this yoga cafe with Wi-Fi, because it was like one of the only places that had Wi-Fi and it was reliable. And it was this yoga cafe with nice vibes. I loved working there. And one day, the guy who owns it could hear that I was kind of wheezing and coughing. And we were good friends. And he made a bet with me. He's like, I bet you that I could cure your asthma in a week using pranayama breathing. And I was like, all right, I'm down for that. And I was like, if you could do it, name your price. I'm happy to pay you.
Hmm.
So he put me through, it was either a week or 2 week long kind of training of pranayama breathing exercises. And he said, I got to do a session a day with him. And then I would also have to go do another session when I would get home at night. That was 30 minutes and 30 minutes. And I did that session. It cured up my asthma. I still use a lot of those breathing techniques today. But basically, what I would do is after these 30 minutes of breathing exercises, I started developing a consistent practice with this. And I would just kind of sit there for 10, 15 minutes afterwards, because it's like just it's less activity, right? So naturally I got curious and I went back to him and I was like, I want to do a 30-day meditation retreat. And I was like, I want to sit in silence for 30 days. I'm down for this. And he said, no, you're not doing 30 days. That's too much. Do 10. It's called Vipassana. And he sent me a link to Vipassana as taught by S.N. Goenka. He's got centers all over the world. It's called Dhamma.org. And I did my first 10-day silent meditation retreat. I was 25, so it was about 5 years ago. Yeah. So this was about 5 years ago. And did my first 10-day Vipassana. Now, in Vipassana, what they teach you is for the first 3 days, it's just attention on your breath, right? Breath in, breath out, mind wanders, bring it back. Just that 10 hours a day for the first 3 days. That's probably the hardest 3 days that you do. Then after that, from day 4 onwards, you start learning body scans. So that's when you basically take each individual part of your body, right? Forehead, nose, eyes, lips, mouth, cheeks, down into your chest, stomach, hands, right? Scanning each individual part of your body and trying to observe if there's any feelings or sensations there, whether it's tingly, vibrating, or itchy, the whole variety of sensations that could pop up. And you're just basically scanning your body for whatever feelings are there. And then throughout the course of the 10 days, you kind of do this technique, and gradually over the 10 days, your body really starts to open up and you start feeling all this crazy crap that you've never felt before. And you're like, holy shit, is this always there? Or, what the hell's going on right now? So that was kind of my first experience. I maintained my practice after that. Since then, I've done a Vipassana 4 more times, 3 times as a student where you sit, and then another time as a server. Where you actually serve. Serving was great. So my meditation practice is still predominantly Vipassana. Every day I do 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes at night, and I do 10 minutes with attention to breath, 20 minutes body scan, and then afterwards I just kind of sit there and I do usually gratitude practice, and I do that untimed. So those are kind of my morning and night. I have experimented with other forms of meditation. You got breathing exercises. Breathing exercises in and of itself, crazy deep rabbit hole between pranayama, box breathing, HRV breathing, Wim Hof breathing. There's so many different types.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about holotropic breathing.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm familiar with the term. I'm not as well versed in the breath work world. I did my basic pranayama breathing exercise, and I've done some box breathing and HRV breathing. But outside of that, no other types.
And As far as holotropic, as far as I know, it's you're breathing it out very, very quickly and you're trying to build up carbon dioxide, perhaps.
So that might be Wim Hof then, something like that. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's very similar, if not the same. And then you're trying to achieve an altered state of consciousness. And I don't think I've achieved that, but I've felt very lightheaded and just, it's an interesting feeling.
Yeah, I'm curious to dive down that rabbit hole. I won't lie, especially because like my asthma still isn't like the greatest. I don't deal with it on a day to day basis, but if it went for like a long, intense run, I know how to trigger it if I wanted to.
Mm.
So I would like to try and see if that type of stuff can better affect it.
Have you ever had to deal with panic attacks? I know at one time, like also have asthma and I was on an airplane. I didn't have my inhaler. And then, of course, I'm thinking that I start to feel the wheezing and then thinking that, oh my God, what am I going to do? Am I going to die? Or is at the very least, they're going to have to ask somebody, hopefully, who has an inhaler, or they're going to have to give me oxygen, or they're going to have to land the plane. Like all those thoughts are running through my head. And of course, that's only making it worse.
Yeah.
Do you have any examples on situations that you felt like were out of control and you were able to get them in control, or what you would recommend to somebody in that situation?
So I've actually had that exact same situation.
Mhm.
This was like 2 years ago. It was relatively recent, maybe even more recent than that. But a nice little hack. They have an inhaler on every flight. I found this out. It's like a flight precautionary measure where they always have an inhaler or multiple inhalers for that matter on the flight. And if you ask for one, if you lose it, they'll give you a free one. But in that moment, right, the attention to breath. I remember I had the exact same moment where I felt tight chested, started tapping my pockets, realizing my inhaler wasn't there, looked in my backpack. Suddenly the heart rate starts going up, and you're like, oh shit. All right, what are we going to do? And I was like, first step, breathe, just take a few deep breaths. Let's figure this shit out. I was trying to do my breathing techniques, but sometimes that doesn't work, especially when you're in your own head. And then I was like, all right, I'm getting the stewardess. I'm going to tell her my situation. And let's see how we take it from here. And then luckily she took care of me. And then in general, right? And I've had a lot of other situations in life, had like when you deal with like bad news that happens or life changes that happen, always the first thing for me is like, go to your breath. Like, A, take a few deep breaths. B, all right, how do you feel? And then like feeling it, like really diving into the pain. I had another article that I wrote called Pain Brings Us Back to the Present Moment. Like when you are in these awful experiences, all you want to do is flee.
Mhm.
But like to dive into that and like feel the pain and like, oh God, this sucks. Like that's a very liberating feeling in and of itself. And it actually helps you to process things a lot faster. So I think like whenever I'm like really struggling with something or something's bothering me in life, worried or anxious about something, I really try and like dive into that discomfort. And I'm like, all right, let's work with it. What do we got to do? Let's sit, let's breathe through it. And I think that's really helped me through a lot of hard times. And I don't get sad for long. It's like I got a good turnover time now of like, all right, let's dive in, let's go to work, and let's get this out of our system.
That reminds me of an exercise that I came to create over the years I call reverse meditation. Whereas I consider meditation in the morning, you're trying to focus your breath, get clear for the day. And at nighttime, the problem is we all have a monkey mind and we'll go into bed and we'll not be able to stop our thinking and our thoughts and our anxieties. And I look at a routine where I'll get inside a massage chair and then I do all these things with having a space dreamy type music and some lavender oils, and I'll just try and retreat in my own head and see what comes out. And often I'll be able to pull out these anxieties that have been sort of running in the undercurrent that I haven't been thinking about, or I'll be able to think about the future and a desire, and I'll be able to build this mental map of where I want to go. And then the next day I have a lot greater clarity. And often we don't ask ourselves, we don't sit with ourselves to ask ourselves what are our anxieties. And then through
Yes.
stoicism, I learned to ask the question, if I have an anxiety, is there anything I can do about it right now? And if I can't, I mentally try and let it go and not worry about it, because there's so many times I look back now where I've had this worry, this anxiety, and nothing came out of it. The worst possible scenario, we're always thinking about it. And in fact, it seems more often the case that the anxiety is worse than whatever actually ends up happening. And
Yeah.
it's so easy to get stuck in that state.
Yeah. Amen. That's why I call it self-created suffering, right? You don't actually have a problem. There is no real problem. It's all created in your head, and it's a figment of your imagination. And you're now creating all these physiological responses to it, and you feel differently because of it, but it's not real. You created all this in your mind.
Mm. Can you talk about transient hypofrontality?
Yeah. So transient hypofrontality goes back to the flow stuff. And basically, to give you a quick scientific overview, as we're talking about mental chatter and the dialogue in your brain, that's primarily controlled in your prefrontal cortex. So a lot of the dialogue that we get is regulated there. So transient hypofrontality is transient, right? Temporary. Hypo, which is the opposite of hyper. So instead of hyper, which is faster, hypo is slowed down, right? So the temporary slowing of the prefrontal cortex. So what that means is if you have a very overactive mind and you have a lot of thoughts going on, it means really active prefrontal cortex. By inducing transient hypofrontality, we could actually calm down that part of the brain, or not necessarily, or offload it, right? Down regulate it. When your brain is in transient hypofrontality, it starts activating other parts of your brain while it down regulates the prefrontal cortex activity. Now, how do we get ourselves into transient hypofrontality? It's actually pretty simple. You can just do it through exercise. Exercise-induced transient hypofrontality is one of the easiest ways to do it. Also, just long walks, movement, yoga, anything like that that gets you into your body and out of your head is a really easy way to induce it. And when you're in transient hypofrontality, which is also one of the qualities of what we see in flow states, but when you induce this, you're actually able to learn faster. So they did studies where they actually had snipers try and learn target acquisition skills, and by artificially inducing transient hypofrontality, found that they were able to cut the time that it took to learn becoming a sniper in half. And then they replicated this study again afterwards. And then also in terms of creativity, transient hypofrontality makes people better problem solvers that they've seen in other studies. Again, Stephen Kotler has a whole bunch of really good information on this type of stuff in Rise of Superman in his courses. But basically, transient hypofrontality is a great way to simultaneously calm down the part of your brain that's driving you crazy. And then while doing that, actually help yourself to perform better.
What is the difference between that and flow?
So transient hypofrontality is just one of the characteristics of flow, right? So we notice that when people are in flow, transient hypofrontality is usually there. Now, there's other parts of flow that we also see, such as low alpha and high theta waves in the brain, right? Again, though, high activity in the brain, lots of thoughts going on, beta wave activity. By calming down the mind, we get into more alpha and theta wave levels. And then also the part of flow that's our favorite, feels really good. That's where you get all the neurochemistry. So you get dopamine, anandamide, norepinephrine, endorphins, and serotonin, which is like a whole neurochemical cocktail bomb of like all the feel-good chemicals at once. So transient hypofrontality doesn't do that. Transient hypofrontality is just the downregulation. Flow is when you got that plus all these other feel-good chemicals and slower brain waves.
Okay. I'm going to ask you about a completely separate question because
Cool.
It was one of the things that I was interested whenever I reached out is your blog post about emotional roulette and going back to how perhaps most of us are not as familiar with our emotions as we think we are. Can you explain that a little bit?
Oh, yeah. The Dice Man. Very messed up book. Read lightly, but a fantastic book. But basically, emotional roulette is rolling the dice and assigning each number of the dice to a specific emotion and allowing yourself to roll the dice, and whatever it lands up on, you have to go do that and express that emotion. Now, this came to me at a time where I was also practicing what I like to call just get weird, right? Can you get weird at the snap of a finger? And a lot of getting weird at the snap of a finger is also just tapping into dormant emotions. So by rolling the dice and going through this exercise, right, I don't generally find myself to be a very angry person. I'm a pretty happy-go-lucky dude. But if I roll that dice and it lands up on anger, you bet your ass I'm going to be screaming my head off, and I can get really red-faced and get my heart pumping real quick and get pissed off about something. And it also feels really good to let that out of my system. So clearly I got some anger in here that I didn't know about. Even just sad, right? Like sadness, trying to intentionally think about sad things, you start crying, right? You didn't know that you had that in you. It really gives you A, that ability to discover these emotions, but then B, you start to notice them in your own life, right? By triggering your anger, now you know what anger feels like. When a situation arises in life that makes you feel angry, you feel all those same feelings. Oh crap, this is anger. Oh, hey, anger, what's going on? And that goes back to the personification stuff. Same thing with sadness. You start to associate certain feelings with certain emotions and then can kind of detach from it accordingly. And it's a really fun practice. And in general, it's like a good party game.
Yeah, and that reminds me of a book a long time ago that described emotions and how we have such limited descriptions for emotions here in the States, whereas there's the common word that's actually becoming more familiar with our culture, which is Schadenfreude, which is the taking pleasure at somebody else's displeasure, like all the videos that you see online about somebody hitting their head or falling off a scooter or a bike. We laugh at that, and that's actually an emotion. It's a type of happiness, or looking at somebody funny. Do you have any experience with these being able to explain emotions with different words, or being able to recognize them beyond the basic states?
I'm not sure if I understand the question, like in terms of like diving deeper into the emotion, or really being able to like take it from macro into micro type of thing.
You can look at that like a micro emotion, because we can be sad, but if we ask ourselves, why are we sad? There's a different type of sadness from, say, the sadness accompanied with being lonely versus something bad happening. And if you recognize that the sadness is because you're lonely, then you can tell yourself, oh, I should call a friend, right? And so there's
exactly
subcategories of these emotions. Are you familiar with any of that?
Yeah, just going to the root. I guess that's kind of what I refer to it as, asking myself why, and trying to get to that root. And then, like you said before, what can I do about it? Is this in my control? Is this not in my control? But even so, just diving to the root, again, you learn a lot about your triggers. Like, what are the things that trigger you emotionally? Why is this bothering you so much? Why do I feel this way? And you can learn a lot about that. And again, right, that's the off the cushion meditation too. That's like the more important work.
I want to talk about your TEDx talk. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. Oh, wow. That was a while ago now. I got great hair in that video. That was when I was growing out my hair. I love that. Right. Again, get weird, be yourself. It's been consistent over the years. But the TEDx talk is about, basically, I call it the creative infrastructure of the brain. And it has a lot to kind of do with neuroplasticity, although I didn't know that at the time. But basically, I use the analogy of freestyling and developing the ability to freestyle rap, like building an anthill. And if you've ever seen the inside of an anthill, it has all these interconnected highways and pathways for the ants to traverse. And the first time that you do any new activity, it's like digging through the dirt. You don't have those pathways built yet. But over time, the more that you've built out the pathways, the easier it becomes to travel it. Then you can start interconnecting them. So I do a lot of freestyle rapping and poetry, and I kind of made the analogy that my head has this whole interconnected highway where I'm able to drive a Lamborghini up and down the thing. For you, it might be a little bit more difficult to try and start rhyming and connecting words together. But this really just applies to learning overall, and that process of learning. In the beginning, it's that struggle phase of, you got to first develop the pathways, and then only over time and consistency are you able to then kind of build out the highway and infrastructure that you need to be able to execute that task effectively. And dare I say, once you have the highway, then that leads you into the flow states.
That's fantastic. How did you get a TEDx talk?
That's another crazy story. Basically, this all happened at the time that I was starting my business, which was called Brain Gain. I was helping people find international jobs, and I didn't have any income, and I needed opportunities to try and make income while getting my business off the ground. And I was in Bangalore, India. So I met a guy via an event. So my roommate put me on stage as an MC one day, and he said, "Troy, I'm gonna make you the MC for this event. Hello everybody, how you doing today?"
What's an MC?
The guy who kind of introduces the speakers and the sponsors. And, we want to give a big thank you to Microsoft for sponsoring this event. Everybody give a big round of applause for our next speaker, that type of thing. So basically, met a guy who was, I was doing that with him. He was a beatboxer. And then I was like, oh, well, I rap. So I gave him some rhymes. And then one day he's like, oh, that was pretty good. So he started getting me gigs all over the city, performing freestyle raps at these large corporates. like Microsoft and Infosys, Wipro, and all these guys, right? So I was rapping in front of audiences like 500, corporate Indians. It was great, great experience. Just a lot of good fun. But then from there, that led to a voice acting opportunity. And then the voice acting guy, basically, I met him at a restaurant and he overheard me speaking and said, "You got a great voice. Let's put you in a cartoon." And I was with my roommate at the time, and this is like our childhood dream. And then he's the guy who then approached me about doing the TEDx talk. And he was like, "You got any topics that you can go on?" And so basically freestyle rapping and led me to voice acting, and then voice acting led me to getting a TEDx talk.
Mm. And where are you today? What are you focusing on? What's in your headspace? What's in the future?
So where am I today changes every week. I work from my computer. I'm at a good place right now where, I'm doing 2 consulting projects, and I manage my time, in terms of like owning my day, so to speak. I was just traveling around Europe for the last 90 days. Now taking a quick pit stop home to visit family in New Jersey. And then I'll be back in Brazil after that. So where I am, physically is always changing, but what I'm working on, I do consulting for businesses where I work with startups, and I work with the Flow Research Collective as well, helping them work on their online courses, do a few other things on the side like coaching. So overall, kind of got a good full plate, spending a good time writing, carving out my day, and trying to do less, actually, focusing on doing less and focusing on doing what I am doing more effectively.
Right. There was a great book called The One Thing about how we tend to
I love it.
Focus on too many things, and that hinders our ability to actually accomplish great things.
Exactly.
And what is your daily routine like? Do you on a daily basis that you think is important to your well-being?
My morning and nighttime are sacred. I wake up, I have a good routine. I'll switch it up a little bit just to give myself some novelty, but it's usually meditation, exercise, trying to get myself on the slack line, getting outside into nature, really just doing something to start the day that puts me in a great mood. I'm a very big believer in don't sit down to do the work until you've put yourself in a state where you feel awesome. So like I'm usually trying to do something in the morning to get myself in a really good mood and a happy place that I'm excited to go, switch into work mode now. When I work, it's a lot of working on just one thing at a time. If I'm doing sales calls, I do calls. If I'm writing, I do writing. If I'm meeting, I block things out for specific times. And then after that, once I'm done, it's recovery mode. Do again, fun things, read books, draw pictures, write poetry, write if I'm feeling it. So it's a pretty simple life, but again, right, morning routine and then nightly routine. Nightly routine usually consists of journaling, again, meditation, reading a book, and then I try and go to sleep with some like binaural beats with lucid dream stuff. I'm trying to get into the dream journaling, but I haven't been the best with that yet.
Yeah, me neither. I've been able to wake up and have a dream, and I write it down very quickly. So I've been able to record some of my dreams, because it's also interesting how quickly we forget a dream almost immediately after we wake up. So I like to write that down. But lucid dreaming is interesting. I've done it maybe once or twice.
Yeah, that'll be one of the next rabbit holes that I dive down.
And so where do you want listeners to go to? Where can they learn to follow you and all the other fantastic, amazing, super interesting articles that you've honestly written and I'm sure will continue to write?
Yeah. Overall, if you've enjoyed this conversation and you like my energy, I would say go check out more of my articles at troyersling.com. Writing a lot about flow states, writing a lot about meditation, productivity, just overall, again, right, how to be a happy person. I look at all of these different gateways, whether it's meditation or spirituality and psychedelics or flow states. It's all just gateways to having a better life, being a happier person who's more comfortable in your own skin. Outside of that, if you really like the flow stuff and you want to dive in deeper, I'd say go check out the Flow Research Collective and their online training, Zero to Dangerous. And then outside of that, yeah, keep working on your own life. Keep implementing what you can to grow and be a happy person.
No, thank you for that, Troy. I've learned a lot.
Thank you for having me, man. This was fun. This just felt like a giant burst of energy that I hope you all enjoyed.
Hey Hey guys, this is Cody again. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Mindhack, and if you're interested in getting more Mindhack-worthy stuff straight to your inbox, then you might consider signing up for my weekly newsletter. It often contains links to new episodes, blog posts, and other interesting finds I found on the interweb in the past week. It pretty much focuses around productivity and efficiency, so if that's your thing, then be sure to visit my website at codymclain.com, that's MCLAIN.com, to sign up. Also, if there are any interesting websites, companies, books, blog posts, quotes, or anything else that was mentioned in this episode, you can find it all and more by visiting the official website for the Mindhack Show at mindhack.com. And as always, if you have any feedback, good or bad, I want to hear it. Send me a tweet, email, or what have you on either of my websites, as my goal with this show is to give you the maximum value in the shortest amount of time. That's all for now, guys. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you guys again soon.